This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Alina. We both lost babies to SIDS in winter 2021.
In the throes of grief, I reached out to a stranger on the internet and our friendship was born.
In the years since, we've been working hard to survive, rebuild, and navigate the continual challenges that have come our way, including divorce,
Job loss,
dating while bereaved,
moving multiple times,
health scares,
pregnancy and parenting a living child,
starting new jobs, and so much more.
We are tired.
Happily ever after is out of the question for us, but this podcast documents our journeys to happier ever after because we believe life after loss is worth living.
So join us as we laugh, cry until we laugh.
Welcome to As Long as I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
I am in the worst mood. Work is pissing me off. The weather is too hot. I spilled coffee on my desk this morning. Everything is dumb, and I hate everything and everyone.
But you muted. You're not in the mood.
I would blame it on IVF hormones, but I'm not doing an IVF cycle, so maybe it's my period. But I'm not supposed to get my period for another week, so it's not that.
It could be the heat. I think the heat is making everyone upset.
It's very irritating. What are we talking about today?
I thought we would talk about the article.
Oh, yeah, I like that. That's a good idea.
The article that blew up our Instagram.
Literally, you posted it, and then I logged into our Instagram, and I was like, what the fuck did Judith post? Why have 50 people messaged us?
So I found an article yesterday. I was on TikTok where I get all my news.
As you always are, yes.
As I always am. And there was an article that I stumbled on that said, it said the most stressful life event is losing a spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And the second most stressful life event is divorce, okay? So this is what the TikTok was saying, which... Okay, the TikTok was saying that why is this? It's because every decision that you make, like as an adult when you're married, is like in the context of your spouse. And so losing a spouse means every aspect of your life has changed.
Okay. So and they also measured stress, the most stressful, I mean the most deadly. The most likely to cause a heart attack, I think, was the measure they were using.
Actually, that was the second article I found.
Oh, okay. So you read two different articles. Okay, got it.
Well, the first was a TikTok. I don't know if I count that.
Okay.
But it had a whole list of the most stressful things. So I want to see if I can find it because I don't know how to get it again. But it was like moving, losing a job, whatever. It was like all these different things.
I'll find it.
And it was interesting because losing a child, it was losing someone close to you was like lower down on the list. It was like losing a partner is 100% stress points, but then like a little bit lower, and divorce was 73% stress points, but then a little bit lower was losing someone close to you. So this first article actually didn't mention losing a child at all.
Okay, life change index score, the stress test. This is what it is. So the highest impact, it says, death of spouse. Underneath, so 100% impact, that's what Judith said. 100 points, the highest level is death of spouse. 73, divorce. 65, marital separation. 63, jail term.
Which I thought was interesting. Because that seems pretty stressful. Talk about every aspect of your life changing. I mean, wouldn't you go in prison?
Yeah, so it has death of close family member as the same amount of stress as a term in jail. But death of a child is not even on this list at all.
Right. Okay.
What's interesting is I want to talk about some of the lower ones because this is hilarious. Minor violation of the law is the lowest one it shows. That's 11 points. Christmas approaching.
Christmas approaching? How much is Christmas?
12.
12.
A vacation is a 13. So if a death of spouse is 100, it's saying Christmas approaching is a 12, which I think is pretty
hysterical. Funny. But then, okay, so then I Googled it because I was like, what is this? Like, what is this article? So I Googled it and a new article came up that I think this TikTok was referring to, which was this Time magazine article. And it was talking about how loss of a spouse or like how loss affects your health and how in 1 week to like a few months, you're at the highest risk of you dying if your spouse dies. Okay. And it was saying, I want to get this right, but it was saying that It says the researchers were somewhat surprised to find that losing a spouse seemed to exert a greater effect than losing a child, although that may be because the average age of people with heart failure in the study was 79. At this age, one doesn't have a large network, and so if one loses their spouse, it may impact the quality of life much more, which I mean, fascinating, because I'm pretty sure losing a child impacts quality of life more, but okay, not more, but just as significantly. Then it says researchers have long known that grief can cause physical changes to the heart. People who live through a very stressful event, sometimes such as the loss of a spouse or partner, sometimes develop cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome. Yes, which I thought interesting. So, okay, it says the death of a spouse increased the risk. It says people who were at a higher risk for dying of heart failure when someone very close to them died. The death of a spouse or partner increased the risk by 20%, the death of a child by 10%, and the death of a sibling by 13%, although the loss of a parent did not increase the risk, which I found fascinating. I found it fascinating that the death of a sibling led to heart failure at higher rates than death of a child. So then we got all these messages in our Instagram, and like a lot of messages. And one of them was a researcher who said that the people lose their child, like the highest frequency of loss of child is when they're between 1 to 3. So so the average age being so those are younger people, so they don't have pre-existing heart issues. If you're already 79 and your spouse and your sister dies, your brother dies, then you're much more likely to die yourself. Basically, it was apples and oranges.
I actually think that the proof is in losing a parent does not indicate an increased risk, because that's also a thing that happens to younger people.
Yes.
You typically don't lose your parent when you're 85.
Yes.
It would be very, very unusual if you lost your parent when you already were in your 70s, 80s, 90s.
Okay. What was also shocking to me is how many people in our Instagram shared that they'd experienced multiple forms of loss.
Yes, that was really interesting. A lot of people
every
said,
single one of them said the loss of a child was the worst. But I'm trying to find. Okay, hold on. This is another thing I found, like a Reddit. I went on a deep dive yesterday because I couldn't believe it. It just seems so bizarre to me. Like losing a child is so unnatural. And I'm not saying losing a spouse is natural, because it's completely unnatural also. But
it is natural to at some point either lose your spouse or die. That is natural, but just not when you're young.
Well, okay, so this is another thing I think that I was thinking about, is that losing your spouse, which it's losing a child, the relationship is so biological in a way that losing your spouse isn't. And so I was surprised to read that losing your spouse was more stressful, because I was like, the biological attachment isn't there. I also think that on the other hand, it's possible that maybe you had many more years with your spouse. It's possible someone said something like, well, all your financial things are intertwined, your house is thing. So in terms of like a stressful life event where you have to manage all these logistics and you have to manage, that could be more difficult than losing a child.
I mean, we've even talked about that.
Not more difficult, just more stressful, because we're talking about
we have talked about that actually in the context of what is different about a SIDS loss versus a stillbirth. And again, I want to be so clear. I'm not saying one is better or worse, but there is a difference in that with a SIDS death, like, your baby dies, and then the actual like burp cloth they spit up on is like right there on the sofa, and like, their laundry's in the hamper. So there's like all these like little things around the house. With the stillbirth, you still have a whole set up nursery, but you don't have like actual things the baby touch. So it is different. I feel like the older the person is when they die, the more intertwined they become in every moment of your life. And so I can imagine that a spouse you've been with for 40 years, like you're saying, like all your finances are intertwined. You share a bed with them, like all of these things that are different.
Well, also another thing is that stress in terms of like paperwork, logistics, like as a parent, I'm responsible for my child. And so I know where all those documents are. I manage them already. Like I already deal with the insurance side, whatever. If my spouse died, like I don't know all the passwords to every single account. I don't know all of the finances things. Like, I mean, I know a lot. I take care of a lot of the responsibilities in our home too, but I'm saying like, in terms of stressful, I can imagine it being very stressful to have to call banks and have to call insurance companies and have to call whatever it is, there's just so much more stuff. The longer the person is in your life, there's so much more stuff to deal with. So, okay, that's one thing. But I want to say another thing, which is that I found like a Reddit subgroup that asked, this was the question, which is harder to lose? Which is harder, lose your parent, spouse, or child? Okay. So this person, I literally went.
Did anybody say parent? No offense to my parents.
Let me read it to you. Hold on, let me read to you. But what's crazy to me is how far deep dive I went on this. Why didn't I stop? Because I'm in an anxious state of mind, and I find that I cannot control my like manic behavior. Okay. Yeah. So this person wrote, I lost both my sons, my husband, parent, extended family, and best friends. Now, this person has a horrible life. I've experienced all of them, and without a question, losing a child is by far the worst loss. There's no pain like it. It's a primal loss. By that, I mean that throughout nature, we see animals that are willing to dive to save their young. It's built in us. I would have done anything to save my child. I would have preferred to die myself. I prayed constantly that God would take me and save my child. And that didn't happen, and my child died. The pain was so intense and overwhelming that I begged God to take me too. The pain rips you open, heart and soul. It comes from a deep place within and can't be described. It is felt physically as well. It felt like my heart was being ripped through my chest. It still does. We bond with our children before they're born. We have hopes and dreams for them. We plan for them, save for them, think about their futures, wonder who they'll be, wonder what they'll do. As they grow, our dreams grow and our love grows. When you lose a child, you lose all of the future you had envisioned for your child, all of those hopes and dreams. It is your only child. If it is your only child, you can lose that sense of continuation or immortality that comes from knowing that your progeny carry on after you are gone. You lose your future, the future you plan, the one with you, older, surrounded by family. You can lose your sense of identity, your sense of purpose, and life can lose its meaning. Family dinners and holidays are forever changed, or in my case, gone forever. It is a death not accepted. It is out of place in time. No parent ever expects to bury a child. It is very hard. You will never get over the loss of the child. The pain never goes away. At best, you learn to live with it. I've lost my husband. We were married 29 years at the time he died. It was painful and I miss him, but after a while, the pain eased and I was able to carry on with my life. I lost my father. I respected and loved him. Again, the loss was difficult and painful and I miss him, but after a while, the pain eased and I carried on with my life. I've also lost my best friend. I think about her and I miss her. I miss talking to her and sharing our lives. But none of these losses compare to losing a child. Losing a child is losing a piece of yourself. It's like no other loss, and unless you've experienced it, you can't understand how bad it really is. The empty hole that is in your heart, the feeling that life has ended but you are still walking, the total emptiness that you are surrounded by, the feeling that nothing and nobody can ever fill in the missing pieces of your heart. You won't even be able to imagine this. Your brain can't allow you to think about this level of pain.
Wow.
Is that?
Who wrote that?
Somebody named Daryl Heck. Daryl Heck. This other person wrote, a child. I've lost my parents and some significant others. My child's death brought me to my knees and I still have not been able to get up. She was my future grandchildren, my life, my best friend, my travel partner in my life. I miss her every second of every day. But then someone else said something. Of course, every relationship is unique. For me, it was losing my spouse. I'm rewriting my answer to say that this is a supremely terrible question. Everyone has a different answer because everyone has a different relationship. How unkind.
Okay, but did that person also lose a child?
I'm not sure.
Because I don't believe you unless you've lost both.
I don't know.
If she's saying my worst loss is a spouse, okay. Like,
this
did you lose a child?
Well, maybe she's comparing it to just a parent. This person said, my sister has endured all three. Our father, her son killed himself and her husband passed away. Losing her child was the worst. We expect to lose our parents. It's part of the natural order. Losing a spouse, especially after 40 years of marriage, is devastating. But again, it's natural. But losing a child, nothing compares. This is really reassuring. This is this like Reddit group that I'm in. Like, it's really reassuring. The thing is that I think the question was what is more stressful, or what causes death after, like what increases your death. So I think what I'm reading is that losing a child is more painful and more difficult, but it doesn't actually necessarily cause you to die.
Although one of our listeners sent us a message and said that her husband had a heart attack in his early 40s right after their baby died. I mean, obviously that's anecdotal, but I'm just saying, like, it does.
No, I know.
I can almost get behind that argument because I feel like, to me, the loss of Quinn was almost not even stress. It was like I wasn't even on Earth. Like, stress was not a thing. I just literally was not on Earth.
I agree. Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that because I completely agree. I wasn't stressed because I wasn't
there.
I wasn't there and I wasn't going to do it. Like, if there was paperwork to be done, like, it wasn't going to get done. You know, like, I would just lose the money, whatever it was. Like, life felt so pointless.
I feel like stress comes when there's something you're meant to do and you either can't or you won't, or there's something happening that's preventing you. It's like you have an accountability or a responsibility that you can't meet. And that causes stress. I'm just making that up, but that's what it feels like. And if that's the definition, then I can imagine if you lose a child, I mean, I did lose a child, so I obviously can imagine, like, that stuff just doesn't matter. You just literally don't do it. And it doesn't even bother you because you are so dead to the world in grief that it does not matter. So I can actually, if that's what we're saying that the study said, I can actually kind of get behind that.
I'm thinking.
However, I'm irritated at this life change index scale that doesn't even have death of a child on it. Like, that just pisses me off that we call death of the spouse the highest. And there's death of, like, a friend. There's gain of a new family member. They have son or daughter leaving home. So what if we add the number for son or daughter leaving home to the number for death of spouse and call that the amount?
Amount of. I also think about the responsibilities to go. If you lose your spouse, you still have, you could have whatever many kids at home. You have to work. But I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that I actually think I don't know what's more stressful, but I think if the question was which one is more difficult, without a doubt, people would say losing a child is more difficult. That's what I think, but I don't know.
I don't want this to come off like we're trying to compare the losses, because, like, we've had a widow on this podcast before. I know she was devastated. Like, these losses are all hard. What feels irritating to me is that I feel like the death of a child is so taboo, they didn't even bother including it in this study. Like, people so desperately don't want to think about it because it's that bad that they didn't even include it in the study. That's how it feels.
I'm also just reacting to something that's surprising to me. I'm not invalidating because I believe it to be true. I was just surprised. Yeah. It was surprising to me.
Yeah. We're going to link all these in the description, by the way, so you guys can read all our stuff. But I want to share some of the
things that some of our Instagram community members shared. Because when I say we're still getting people sending us things.
People had big feelings about this.
Big feelings about it. And then you answered a bunch, but I didn't answer a bunch, and we tried. This person says...
We try desperately, by the way, everybody, to respond to every message we get, and we really, really, really try. Sometimes we miss them, and it's not you, it's us, I promise.
This person said they don't agree. This person said, I call bullshit. I think there are way more studies done on people whose spouses die, just that they think that the research is flawed. Maybe because when you lose a child, you have your spouse to lean on, but when you lose your spouse, you're alone. And no one else is experiencing that loss the same way as you. Although I agree, although I would argue that your spouse doesn't necessarily.
But also, I'm sorry, like, I did that. I didn't have my spouse to lean on. And it's an absolute, like, and listen, I don't want to minimize the grief that was losing Kaylee in my life. Like, that was obviously a huge deal. And I still feel like in some ways I'm processing it. But also, it didn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean that to sound cavalier or like I don't care about her, because I care about her deeply. I care about her family deeply. I feel the loss of her family and her, like, all the time. It didn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
Quinn dying was incalculably worse. And I know she didn't die, but incalculably worse. Like, not even a comparison. And I just cannot, I can't get behind it. I can't.
This person wrote something so funny. that I want to read. It says, "Oh great, now I get to stress about dying from stress. I'm wondering I'm wondering if losing a spouse is more stressful because you have to figure out big things like how to financially support your own family, how do I have to sell my house, did she have life insurance, how does probate work, bank passwords, etc." And when my child died, I was just like, well, kill me. I'm laying here in bed crying and hoping I die too. So I don't know if it was stress other than the immediate decision making around funeral. It was just pure lifelong torture, which I think is so funny.
Yeah, that is funny.
One other thing that they spoke about is how your increased risk of dying.
Mm-hmm.
So because we lost a child, we have an increased risk of dying of about 10%. I think that's what it said. I don't know what to say about that. But
I mean, I'm surprised it's only 10%. At this point, I believe 10%. But in the early days, like I do feel, I've said this so many times, I genuinely did feel like I was dying and I wasn't eating, I wasn't going outside. Like I do feel like looking back, I think I probably was at increased risk of dying of something. I don't know what, but like I definitely was not well.
Well, I'll also, one of the things I was going to say is that it says that after people have a loss, they turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like pills or drugs or whatever it is, cutting, whatever it is. And that subsequent coping mechanism can kill them.
That makes so much sense.
So I would say that our risk is probably less at this point. I would actually say it's less than 10% for two reasons. First, they said that the first week is your most vulnerable after like that, you know, and then the next few months. At this point, we're more than a few months out. So it seems that our risk has gone down significantly. And secondly, we have not taken on any of those secondary coping mechanisms today. As we know, life could change. And so our risk is probably significantly less than if we had taken on, you know, an addiction of some sort.
You know, the other thing too that I think, especially in the early days, was an increased danger.
Driving.
Well, yeah, what I was going to say is I think my self-protective mechanism was gone.
Agreed.
Like I would walk across the street without looking. Like if I was driving a car, I'd be completely dissociated. Like I think I could have much easier died an accidental death because I just didn't give a shit about being careful about things.
I agree.
I mean, you and I met up, complete strangers from the internet.
But I would do that now.
I know, but I never would have. And that's just like a good example of like, I just didn't, I was like, okay, if I get murdered, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
No, like, whatever.
True, 100%. No, I think that's true. So I guess this is just to say that losing a spouse and losing a child maybe are comparing apples and oranges is in that they're both fruit. But one is a cactus fruit. and
one's a grape.
And one's a grape. You could die from both. I'm not saying you can't. You could choke on a grape for sure. I don't know. I don't like the feeling of comparing. That's not my intention. I was just really surprised and taken aback.
Yeah. Again, just to reiterate, I want all the widows and widowers out there. I don't want you to feel like we don't recognize how difficult all of this has been. And I think especially we want to recognize that there are ways that your loss is worse. I think that's the thing we always say.
Wait, can I say something else? Which is that, okay, I thought of something actually when we had the widower on our podcast, which she said.
Jess Walker, 5.post. I'll link it in the description.
Okay, but one thing that I was thinking about is that her husband was sick for a long time. And before he passed away, not a long time, like maybe a year or two. I don't know if that's a long time or not a long time, but I'm sure when you live in it, it feels like a long time.
Yeah.
Or not a long time. I don't know.
Okay, we get it. You don't know.
But she said like her husband was able to give her some direction about how he wanted to be remembered. He was able to give her some sort of direction about what was important to him, what was not important to him. There were so many more people because he was an adult who had memories of him, who had a relationship with him, and I think there's something about losing a child and there's so much stigma around it that first of all, people expect you to move on because they expect you to move on in a different way. they have fewer people to help carry the burden because there's just less people that know this kid. I think, well, unless you lost an adult child, but like in terms of losing a baby or an infant, what I say is you are really charting the path on your own when it comes to how am I going to remember this child and how.
Well, let me add,
incorporate
we
this.
had an interview with your friend Miranda's mom, Christine, who lost an
Yes.
adult child, and she felt the same as Jess did, where she felt like at least she had like Miranda's friends to help her carry
Yes.
the weight of the loss and keep her memory alive. Like there was a whole
Losing
other group
a
of
young
people.
child, it's a really unique burden to carry because you as their parent are responsible for them in life and in death, and in a way that you're not responsible for your spouse. That's my thought, that you are responsible for your child, and so you are responsible for their memory. You are responsible. It's when you lose a spouse, like their parents also can help carry that burden. But I feel like it is my number one responsibility to carry the loss of my son and to perpetuate his memory in a way that feels very lonely and isolating.
You know, as I'm sitting here and I have my beloved cat on my lap, I'm realizing they also don't have death of a pet on here, and that is a very stressful life event. Very sad, I should say, very devastating. But I agree that maybe it's not stressful.
It's probably not stressful because what paperwork do you have to think about?
Exactly. So now that I'm thinking about it more and more and more, I'm like, okay, this is not measuring the devastation of the loss. This is really devastating. This is really measuring the life stress.
I wonder if the question should be reframed as, which is more impactful? The death of a child or the death of a spouse? Which one is going to have a greater impact on your life? So, audience, let's send them an email and tell them to change their study, because that's really
there's
what
a group of really pissed off bereaved moms.
We just want to know what you were trying to. What are you trying to get at?
What should we call this episode? What are we even talking about?
Let's see what Time Magazine called their article. Let's see what it says. It says supporting our heroes. Oh no, that's an ad.
That's not it. You were such a gem.
Oh, here's what it says. Losing a loved one can be life-threatening. Written by Tara Law. Okay, I just want to say that they reviewed family data and national databases for 491,000 patients. That's a long time. Who were followed for about 4 years on average. To me, that seems like a long time.
I mean, it sounds legit. Like,
and it says bereavement was closely associated with increased so-called unnatural deaths like suicide. People were at higher risk of heart failure when someone very close to them died. And then it says the risk of spouse or partner was 20%, and then child was 10%.
I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but I don't think I had the energy to kill myself after Queen died.
I agree.
I just literally wasn't on Earth. I think if I had accidentally died, I would have been thrilled, but I just don't think I had the wherewithal to like execute a plan.
I agree. It was too much effort for us. We're just doing the best we can. We were just trying to get out of the bed. I actually was thinking about the first time I went shopping after Aiden died and how I couldn't tell the difference between colors.
God. What a crazy.
How I couldn't tell the difference between colors. I didn't know my body. I just remember being like, is this a shirt? What is this?
I remember the first time I tasted food and it tasted good. Like,
really?
Had a taste. Yeah. But I just, when I say like, I didn't have the energy to kill myself, or when we say like, we just weren't on Earth, like we literally can't see colors. We can't taste food. Like, of course.
But I think that's
we're not doing paperwork.
But I think for people who lose spouses, they probably can't eat food and don't taste color either. I don't taste food or don't taste color.
Can't taste color.
They can taste color. That's my thought. I don't know. But my guess is they probably can't.
So we actually talked to a researcher on our Instagram, and she took a deep dive into the literature and gave us some more insight into what the study is actually saying. So I'm going to play her audio clips here for you, and I think it makes a lot more sense when she explains it. Don't you agree, Judith?
Yes, but she's English, just so you know. It totally threw me off.
She's so cute.
You see the way
Lenny's mom.
And it was so polished, and it was so like pleasant to listen to.
I know it was.
I think it was 2 in the morning when I was listening to it, and I was like, oh,
All right. Well, thank you, Lenny's mom, for this little explanation of.
So basically, you can ignore what we said before because it turns out we didn't understand the literature.
I think that's Time Magazine's fault. They were deliberately being a little bit.
Well, someone said it sounds clickbaity, and I guess it was. We fell for the clickbait. So this is a direct quote from the article. The death of a child and the suicidal death of a spouse are classified as catastrophic stressors and rated 6 on a 6-step scale of severity of stress by a widely used classification system. The death of a child is beyond our expectations about the life cycle, and thus losing a child is generally difficult to accept and cope with. Okay, so I've just skim read it. They have taken a large sample of people who have diagnoses of heart failure. They've then looked back to see whether these people have experienced bereavement. The reason why they've done that is because some other studies showed a bit of a link between stress and heart failure, although that's not actually as well kind of founded as what you might assume. So it's not really widely shown in research. So based on the idea that grief is a large stressor, they wanted to see whether that increased the risk for death by heart failure or other causes in these people. But they looked firstly at patients with heart failure and then looked back to see whether they'd experienced loss. They then use something called regression analysis. So regression analysis can see whether there is a meaningful correlation or association between two different variables. So it can be sometimes that, yeah, it looks like there's a link, but actually when you do the stats, it's kind of coincidence. So they made 3 different models. So they made one where they looked at time, and that's when they found that the death's most likely to happen in the first week after a loss. One where they looked at one or multiple losses, and they found that multiple losses had a... And the final model was where they split it up based on different relationship. And everything that I've read in this study is very clear that it's saying like what they found is particularly clear for spouses and children. There is a section on that I read to you in the discussion that talks about how they consider like the death of a child is widely considered a catastrophic event. In no way in this article does it say anywhere that the death of a spouse is more stressful. That's not how it's discussed and talked about at all. There is, if you look at the statistics, I mean, it's tiny, but there is a slightly bigger effect for the death of a spouse. Now, that's only me looking at the statistical results. They don't discuss it, and they don't discuss it like that. There is a stronger association for people losing a spouse over the age of 75 than younger patients. And they think that's because elderly people are more frail and because they have smaller social networks. So that loss might have big implications. And I think it's exactly as we were saying earlier, that it's because bereaved parents are likely to be younger. Yeah, I did think when I saw, like when I read the Time article, I mean, I don't know, it also did have quotes from the researchers, didn't it? But then you don't know how people have taken their words, you know? I'd be happy to talk to you more about it, but in no way here does it claim. It's just making a very, very gentle claim where they're kind of like, like I said, they tend to be quite cautious researchers. Yeah, all they're saying is that the death of a family member is associated with an increased risk of mortality among patients who already have heart failure. Let me know if you have any other questions, but it's been interesting.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow. Yay!